Her sister tossed her into the river. Then an alpha found her. Clara's hands were shaking when she read the letter for the second time, and this time, the shaking was not from cold or from exhaustion, but from the kind of fear that arrives when your body understands something before your mind catches up. She had been standing at the back counter of the flower shop for 10 minutes, reading the same 2 pages over and over, moving her lips silently along the words, as though speed were the problem, as though if she simply slowed down and gave each sentence its proper attention, the date at the top of the letter would rearrange itself into something more reasonable. It did not rearrange itself. The date remained what it was, 14 months ago. The letter had arrived in the Morning Post, tucked between a restaurant flyer and an invoice from her eucalyptus supplier, handled and ordinary, as if it were nothing at all. The envelope had her full name on the front, typed in clean, formal letters, Clara Voss. The return address in the top left corner read, Hartley and Ford Law Associates. She had never heard of the firm before. In the bottom right corner of the envelope, barely visible, was a small sticker of the kind post offices use when they are redirecting mail. She had peeled back one edge of it before catching herself, and beneath it, just legible, was the address the letter had originally been delivered to. Her parents' house on Heron Lane. She folded the letter back along its creases, pressed it flat against the counter, and spread it open again. She read the first paragraph for the 4th time. Her grandmother, Dorothy Voss, had passed away 15 months prior, following a private illness. The estate had been settled and fully documented through the firm. Clara had been named as a specific beneficiary in the will, not a shared beneficiary, not part of a general family disbursement. Specifically, individually named, with a specifically and individually stated amount. The figure on the second page was the reason her legs had stopped working properly when she first read it. She had sat down on the small stool beside the sink, and she had stared at it, and she had understood, with the slow arriving clarity of something too large to absorb all at once, that the number printed there was not a formality. It was real. It was hers, or had always been meant to be hers, and it could have changed the entire shape of her life. It was enough to clear her debts, close the gap between what the shop earned and what she actually needed, and still leave money for something she had never been able to think about before, without qualifying it immediately with the word someday. Someday when there's more. Someday when things are easier. Someday when it's the right time. There had been 14 months of someday, and she had known nothing about any of it. She put the letter in the inside pocket of her jacket. She straightened up. She went to unlock the front door of the shop, because it was 7 minutes past 7, and the shop opened at 7, and the first of her regulars would be coming shortly, and she was not a person who allowed things that hurt to stop the work from happening. This was the truth about Clara Voss that most people who knew her had come to rely upon, whether they were aware of relying on it or not. She kept going. She had been keeping going, since she was old enough to understand that in the Voss household, keeping going was the only thing anyone asked of her. Not brilliance, not presence, not even happiness, just the continued, quiet functioning of someone who handled things so that the people who mattered could focus on mattering. She was 24 years old. She was the younger of 2 sisters, though the word younger captured almost nothing of the actual difference between her position in the family and Vivian's. Vivian was 27, 3 years older, and she occupied the center of the family the way the sun occupies the center of a solar system, not by effort or by drama, but simply by the natural gravitational arrangement of everything around her. Vivian did not try to be the center. She simply was, and everything else adjusted to accommodate it. Their mother, Helen, had Vivian's photograph on the sitting room wall, in a frame that caught the light. She had Clara's photograph, in an album on the bottom shelf. This was not deliberate cruelty. Helen Voss was not a deliberately cruel woman, but it was a truth that Clara had absorbed early and had learned to live beside, the way you learn to live beside a neighbor who plays their music just loud enough to be an inconvenience. Their father, George, was a man who had discovered peace through non-interference, and had been practicing it for so many years that it had become indistinguishable from his personality. He watched television. He drank his tea. He said well done when things went well for people around him, and made small, sympathetic sounds when they didn't. He had handed the flower shop to the family 3 years ago, when it became clear that managing it was more than he wanted to do, and he had not asked anyone's opinion on the arrangement that followed. Clara had been the arrangement that followed. She had not agreed to it. Not exactly. It had happened in the way that arrangements in that family always happened. Vivian was too busy. Helen needed someone she could trust, and Clara had never been the kind of person who made leaving difficult. She had handed over her evening classes and her plans and the apartment closer to the city that she had been looking at, and she had moved into a flat 10 minutes from the shop on Millgate Street and learned the business from the delivery schedule up. She was, it turned out, genuinely good at it. She had an eye for color and proportion that made her arrangements memorable. She had a steady way with customers, the kind of patience that made people feel heard without being patronized. She had taken the shop from a modest, frequently loss-making operation to something that regularly turned a small but reliable profit, and she had done this through the kind of consistent, unglamorous daily effort that never made headlines because it was never in crisis, and never dramatic, and never needed rescuing. She had not been thanked for it in any direct way. She had not expected to be. The morning moved at its usual rhythm. Mrs. Good came in at 7:20, as she did every Tuesday, for a small bunch of whatever was freshest. Clara chose white ranunculus for her that morning, because they were at their best, and Mrs. Good never specified and trusted Clara's judgment entirely, which Clara had always found quietly touching. A young man came in after that, looking sheepish, and asking for help with flowers for a third wedding anniversary. Clara walked him through the options, gave him an opinion he had clearly needed someone to give him, and sent him away with a wrapped bunch of pink peonies and a small card in a craft envelope that she recommended he write something in before he presented it. A phone order came in before 9. 12 identical arrangements for a corporate event that afternoon. Neutral tones, professionally styled. She wrote it up, confirmed the delivery address, and began work on them between other tasks, her hands moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who has performed the same actions enough times that they happen below conscious thought. It left the upper part of her mind entirely free. She thought about the letter every minute of that morning. She thought about the forwarding sticker and what it meant. She thought about the date. She thought about her grandmother, who had not been the kind of woman to forget things or be imprecise about money. Dorothy Voss had kept her accounts in handwritten ledgers until the very end. She had known exactly what she had and exactly what she intended to do with it, and she had specifically named Clara. Not the family, not the estate in general, but Clara individually, which meant she had thought about it and made a considered decision. And the letter had gone to Heron Lane and had not been passed on for 14 months. Clara's friend Nora called at 11:30. Nora Bradley had known Clara since they were both 15, which meant she had a decade of context for everything Clara said, and was therefore, in most conversations, ahead of whatever Clara was about to tell her. She was a paralegal, direct by nature and by professional habit, and she had a particular quality of attention that meant, when she went quiet, it was because she was thinking, not disengaging. "You sound like something happened," Nora said, before Clara had finished her greeting. "Something did," Clara said. She stepped into the back of the shop, away from the front counter, and described the letter simply and in full. The firm's name, the date, the amount, the forwarding sticker, the address beneath it. Nora was quiet for longer than usual. "That was at your parents' house," she said. "Yes. For 14 months. That's what the dates suggest." Another pause, longer this time. "Clara," Nora said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was choosing her words with particular care. "That is not a postal delay." "I know. Someone held on to that letter. I know that as well. What are you going to do?" Clara looked at the bucket of roses she had been trimming when the call came in. She thought about Heron Lane. She thought about Helen's kitchen, the neat surfaces, the orderly routines, the way her mother had of filling any silence with smooth, domestic competence. "I'll go and talk to my mother this evening," she said. "I want to hear what she says." "She'll have an explanation," Nora said. "A good one." "I expect so," Clara said. "I still need to hear it." She closed the shop at 6 and drove to Heron Lane. The house was calm and well lit, the way it always was, the window boxes recently watered, the front step clean. Her father was in the sitting room with the television on, at a volume that suggested he had stopped noticing the world outside the screen some hours ago. He raised one hand when she came in, without turning his head. Helen was in the kitchen. She was making soup from scratch, moving between the counter and the stove in the unhurried rhythm of someone who has performed this particular task in this particular kitchen for 30 years. She turned when Clara came in, kissed her cheek quickly, and said she hadn't been expecting her that evening. "I need to ask you something," Clara said. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, which she had calculated in advance was the right position, far enough from the door to make a quick exit seem deliberate, close enough to the table that she had a surface to ground herself against if she needed it. "Of course," Helen said, turning back to the stove. "I received a letter today from a law firm called Hartley and Ford," Clara said. She watched the back of her mother's head. "About Grand's estate." The spoon in the pot slowed, 1 full second. Then it resumed. "Oh?" Helen's voice was pleasant and careful. "What did they write?" Clara noted that she said, "What did they write?" not "What did they want?" which was what you said when you didn't know what was in the letter. "They wrote about an inheritance Gran left me," Clara said. "A significant one. The letter was dated 14 months ago." Helen turned around. Her expression was composed and patient, the expression of a woman receiving mildly inconvenient information and managing it gracefully. "You know how slow these legal firms can be," she said. "The post gets lost all the time. I wouldn't worry too much about the date." "It wasn't lost," Clara said. "It was forwarded from this address. Someone here received it, and then sent it on to me. Today." A barely perceptible tightening around Helen's eyes. "We've had so much post lately, with all the engagement planning," she said, and her voice had gone very slightly flat, in a way that Clara had learned to read, the way she had learned to read weather. "Things pile up. I must have come across it in a stack somewhere, and sent it along without thinking. These things happen." 14 months after it arrived, Clara said. "I really cannot be expected to remember exactly when every piece of post comes through this door," Helen said, and now the patience in her voice had an edge to it, the very faintest edge, like a seam in fabric that is about to give. "If you have questions about the inheritance, you should call the law firm directly. They'll be able to tell you everything. That's what they're paid for." She turned back to the stove and lifted the pot lid with a small, definitive sound. Clara looked at her mother's back for a long moment. She noticed what Helen had not done. She had not asked what the inheritance was. She had not asked how much. She had not asked what the letter said. She had gone immediately to explaining the delay, which was the answer to a question Clara had not yet asked out loud. Helen already knew what was in that letter. "Good night, Mum," Clara said. She said goodbye to her father, who raised his hand again from the sofa, and she walked outside and stood beside her car in the cooling evening air. She breathed. She did not cry. She drove home. Her apartment was small and quiet and entirely hers, which was the thing she valued about it most. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter open in front of her, and she looked at the figure on the second page, and she thought about her grandmother sitting on those back steps, talking quietly about people who do the work without the noise. She thought about Adam Fletcher, and the way things between them had ended, without a real explanation. She thought about the engagement party, and the centerpieces she had made, and the way Patrick's mother had asked where they came from, and her own mother had smiled, and said they had their sources. She opened her laptop. She found the law firm's contact page. She wrote a short, polite email, confirming receipt of the correspondence, and requesting an appointment. She sent it. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would talk to Vivian. She had decided this on the drive home, clearly and without drama, the way she had always made decisions that felt entirely settled. Not because she was ready, not because she thought it would be easy, because she had spent 24 years being the person who absorbed things quietly, and somewhere between reading that letter and hearing her mother's voice go flat, something in her had reached the end of its patience with that arrangement. She wanted the truth, the whole of it, not managed, not redirected, not served with a plausible explanation and a turned back. The truth. She was going to get it. Vivian picked up on the third ring. This was unusual. Vivian was a person who treated incoming calls as optional, to be returned at her own convenience and on her own terms, and she had made an art form of being unreachable until she had decided a conversation was worth having. The fact that she answered almost immediately told Clara two things. 1, that Vivian had been expecting this call, and 2, that she had decided it was better to control the conversation from the start than to let it develop without her. "Clara," she said, and her voice was the warm, slightly distracted tone she used when she was playing the role of a busy, well-meaning older sister. "What's going on?" "I need to talk to you," Clara said. She was standing in the shop before opening, the lights still off, the quiet that existed before a day began settling around her. "Can we meet today, after I close?" "Today's quite packed," Vivian said, and Clara heard the half-second calculation behind the lightness. "But come over at 7 if you want. I'll be home by then." Clara said she would be there. She hung up and stood in the dim shop for a moment, looking at the buckets of flowers in the refrigerator unit through the glass door. They were the particular still life quality of things waiting to be arranged, already themselves, already beautiful, not yet part of anything larger. She had always liked that about them. She opened the shop. She worked through the day with her full attention on the work, because that was both her habit and her strategy. Giving a task her complete focus was the thing that had always made her good at her work, and today, it also served the useful purpose of keeping the part of her mind that was afraid, very quiet, and very contained. The orders were ordinary. A birthday arrangement in bright yellows and oranges, a sympathy piece in white and soft green that she handled with the particular care those pieces always required, because the people who came in for sympathy flowers were carrying something and deserved to be understood. A corporate order for a reception that evening. She filled each one with the same precision and the same genuine attention she always brought to things. Nora sent a message at noon. "Let me know how it goes tonight. I'm here." Clara sent back, "I know, thank you," and meant both things. She locked the shop at 6, drove home, changed into clean clothes that she had chosen without overthinking, and drove to Vivian's apartment building on Clifton Avenue. It was a building that declared itself confidently, the marble lobby, the doorman who nodded when she gave her name, the lift with the mirrors on 3 walls. She had always found the mirrors in that lift unsettling, the strange doubling of yourself when all you wanted was to move from one floor to another without being observed. Vivian answered the door in a cashmere top and good trousers, her hair loose in a way that suggested she had let it down specifically and recently, the kind of effortless presentation that took effort. She was holding a glass of water. She had not offered to make tea, which was a small thing, and also a telling one. She was managing the meeting, not welcoming it. "You look tired," she said, which was her opening move in conversations she wanted to control, noting something about the other person, something just slightly unflattering, which shifted the first few minutes into a space where that person felt observed and assessed, rather than secure. Clara had grown up receiving this particular move. "I'm fine," she said. "Can we sit down?" They sat in Vivian's living room, which was immaculate in the way Clara had always privately found exhausting to be inside. No books left out, no half-drunk cups on the coffee table, no evidence that a person actually lived here rather than staged it. Vivian sat with her legs crossed, and her glass held in both hands with the ease of someone who had arranged the room, and her own position in it, and was comfortable with the arrangement. "So what's going on?" Vivian said, with a warmth that did not quite reach her eyes. "I received a letter yesterday," Clara said, "from a law firm, Hartley and Ford, about Grand's estate." She watched Vivian's face, the way you watch water when you want to know what's underneath it. There was a movement, very small, very fast, in the muscles around Vivian's eyes. Then the composed, interested expression resumed. "Grand's estate," Vivian repeated. "What did they write?" "They wrote about an inheritance left to me specifically," Clara said. "A significant amount. The letter was dated 14 months ago and had been forwarded from Mum and Dad's house." Vivian nodded slowly, as though processing new information. The performance was very good. It would have worked on almost anyone who did not know Vivian in the way Clara knew her, which was from the inside of a shared childhood, which meant knowing all the performances and their particular qualities. "That's strange," Vivian said. "Have you called the firm?" "I emailed them last night," Clara said. "They'll be in touch shortly." She paused for exactly the right beat. Mum didn't ask what was in the letter. Vivian looked at her. "When I told her I'd received a letter from a law firm about Grand's estate, she didn't ask what it said," Clara continued. "She went straight to explaining the delay. She knew what was in it." A longer silence now. Vivian took a slow, deliberate sip of water. She set the glass down on the coffee table. She uncrossed her legs. All of these were small adjustments, the body reconfiguring itself, moving away from one stance and toward another. "Clara," she began. "I'm not here to have a managed conversation," Clara said. "I don't want an explanation that's designed to make me feel better about it. I want to know what happened to that letter, and if there's anything else I don't know about, I want to know that too." Vivian looked at her for a long moment, and then, in the way that sometimes happens when someone has been carrying a thing for so long that the effort of continuing to carry it simply exceeds the value of the secret, the performance stopped. Not dramatically. Not with a collapse or a raised voice. It simply stopped, the way a held breath stops when you finally exhale, and what remained was Vivian, without the warmth, without the managed light, just the person underneath. There wasn't just one letter, Vivian said. The room was very quiet. There were 3, Vivian said. The first arrived about 7 weeks after Gran passed. The second was a follow-up. The third came with a formal deadline notice from the firm. She said each one as though reading from a list. I intercepted all of them before you had a chance to see them. The last one, Mum found first and brought to me. She helped make sure it didn't reach you. Clara looked at her sister. Her hands were folded in her lap. She did not move them. I used the money, Vivian continued, and her voice was so completely without apology that Clara understood something she had always suspected but never let herself fully believe. Vivian did not feel guilt the way other people did. She felt inconvenience. She felt the irritation of being caught. But guilt required imagining the other person's experience as real and important, and that was not an ability Vivian had ever meaningfully developed where Clara was concerned. I had significant debts. Patrick and I had just started seeing each other, and I needed to appear a certain way. A well-managed life, financially stable, no loose ends showing. The inheritance resolved a problem that would otherwise have been embarrassing. You stole from me, Clara said. Her voice was even and quiet, and she held it that way deliberately, because she had learned early that raising your voice in conversations with Vivian cost you leverage without gaining anything. I handled a situation, Vivian said, and I intended to make it right eventually. I just needed time. You had 14 months, Clara said. 14 months, 3 letters, and 1 deadline notice. Vivian's jaw moved slightly. The timing was never right. The timing was never right, Clara repeated slowly. She heard the words as they settled, and she thought about all the things she had believed about herself in those 14 months. All the quiet, daily convincing that what she had was enough. That the shop was enough. That her small flat and her routines and her careful management of an ordinary life were simply her life, and not the consequence of money and opportunity being decided for her without her knowledge. Is there anything else? She said. Vivian's expression shifted. Something moved in it that Clara had not seen before. A kind of calculation that was different from the social kind. More internal. As though she were running numbers on something and finding the answer uncomfortable. Clara, she said. Is there anything else? Clara said again. Flat. Not a question anymore. The silence that followed was of the specific variety that exists just before something that cannot be taken back. Clara felt it. She had felt silences her whole life. Learned to read their temperature and duration. This one was very still and very cold, and she waded through it without looking away. Adam Fletcher reached out to me, Vivian said. The name arrived in the room like something dropped from a height. About 1.5 years ago, Vivian continued, he asked me about you. He wanted to understand you better. He was, at the time, completely devoted to you. She paused. I told him you had a long history of serious mental health difficulties. That you had been through several significant episodes over the years. That the family had been carefully managing it for a long time, and that the people who loved you had always carried that quietly, so as not to embarrass you. Clara looked at her sister, and did not speak, and did not move. I told him the prognosis was not encouraging, Vivian said. I told him the periods of stability could last for some time, but that long-term consistency was unlikely. None of that is true, Clara said. Every word was slow and deliberate. No, Vivian said. None of it is. You told lies about my mental health to the man I was building a life with, Clara said. You fabricated a history of illness that does not exist. You gave him information that would make any reasonable person afraid to commit to a future with me. You were becoming settled, Vivian said, and the fact that she could still say this, could still frame it in the language of strategic management rather than cruelty, was perhaps the most clarifying thing she had ever said to Clara. If you had a stable relationship and financial independence at the same time, you would have moved. The shop would have needed someone else. Our parents would have been left to deal with it, and they were not capable of doing that without you. Someone needed to handle it. I handled it. Clara stood up. She picked up her bag from where she had set it beside the sofa. She walked to the door. She did not say anything else, because there was not a sentence in any language she spoke that felt equal to what had just been told to her, and because speaking now, when her voice was in danger of losing the evenness she had maintained through the whole of the conversation, would not have served any purpose she cared about. She let herself out. She took the lift down. The mirrored walls reflected her back to herself from 3 angles. Face pale, posture straight, eyes very clear and very still. She crossed the marble lobby. The doorman said good evening, and she said good evening back, because she was still herself, still the person who answered people when they spoke to her, and that was not going to change because of what she had just learned. Outside, the night was cold, and there were people on the pavement walking past with their evening lives, their ordinary purposes, their uncomplicated relationship to the world around them. She sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. The street lamps came on while she sat there. The city moved around her. She thought about Adam. She thought about the 2 years they had spent building something that had felt, to her, like the beginning of a life she had never quite let herself imagine having. She thought about the way he had listened to her, and made her laugh, and paid attention to the small things she said, and carried them forward into later conversations, which was the particular form of care she had always found most meaningful. She thought about the gradual cooling, the silence that had grown between messages, the evening he had sat across a table from her, and struggled to explain why he was leaving, his face carrying something she had not recognized at the time as guilt. She thought about 2 years of believing that she had somehow been insufficient, not enough for him, not enough in some essential way that she had been unable to identify but had spent a long time trying to correct. She had been trying to correct a lie. She drove home. She called Nora when she was inside, and the door was closed, and she was sitting on the floor of the hallway, with her back against the wall, which was the only position that felt appropriate to the conversation she was about to have. She told Nora everything, clearly and in full, without pausing for her own feelings, because she could not afford to do that yet. She would later. She knew herself well enough to know that the feelings would arrive in full, and that she would have to sit with them, but not on the phone with Nora, not tonight, not when she still needed to think. When she finished, Nora was quiet for so long that Clara checked the line. "Are you there?" Clara said. "I'm here," Nora said. Her voice was very controlled. "I'm deciding whether to say something that will not be useful right now." "Don't say it," Clara said. "All right." A pause. "What do you need?" "I need a day," Clara said. "Maybe 2. I need to sit with this." "I'll be here," Nora said. "You know where I am." She hung up. She got off the floor. She went to the kitchen and made tea, because it was the thing to do when she needed her hands to do something steady and reliable. She sat at the table with the cup warming her hands, and she let the first of the feelings arrive, slowly, the way things arrive when you have been holding a door shut, and finally, deliberately, let go of the handle. She did not sleep much that night. The next day and the day after, she opened the shop at 7 and did the work. She did not cry at the counter. She did not take time away. She filled orders and wrapped bouquets and answered the phone and managed the accounts, and she was entirely present for every customer who came through the door, because they deserved that regardless of what was happening in her private life. But underneath the work, running as steadily as the current beneath a still surface, was the knowledge of everything Vivian had told her, and the particular, specific weight of understanding that her own sister had looked at her life and decided, from a position of extraordinary entitlement, exactly how much of it Clara deserved. On the morning of the 3rd day, her phone showed a message from Vivian. She had not heard from Vivian since she had walked out of that apartment. She had half expected a follow-up performance, an apology, designed to close the matter with a minimum of consequence. She had been preparing, in the quiet part of her mind, for that conversation. But this was not that. The message was brief. It said, "I've been thinking about what I said. I want to make this right, properly. Can you meet me tonight? Ridgewood Bridge, 10 o'clock. I need to say this to your face." Clara read it twice. She thought about Vivian's face during their conversation, the particular blankness of someone who had stopped performing because performance was no longer necessary. She thought about what it would mean if Vivian had spent 3 days arriving at genuine remorse, if the stripped-down, unguarded version of herself she had seen in that apartment had, in the quiet of the days since, produced something real. She thought about what it meant to still want, despite everything, a sister instead of an enemy. She typed back, "I'll be there." She did not call Nora. She knew what Nora would say. She knew Nora would be right. And she also knew that she had never been fully able to make the rational decision where Vivian was concerned, because the hope that the relationship could be something other than what it was had always been exactly strong enough to override the evidence. She drove to Ridgewood Bridge at 10 o'clock in the dark and the rain, and she told herself, the whole way there, that this was the last time. If what she found on that bridge was not real, she was done. She was absolutely done. She parked on the verge. She got out of the car into the rain. She walked to the bridge. She could see Vivian from the far end, standing near the middle, facing the river, wearing a dark coat with the collar turned up. The light from the 2 lampposts at either end of the bridge barely reached her. Clara walked toward her, her footsteps quiet on the wet stone. When she got close enough to see Vivian's face, she knew immediately that this was not remorse. She had been right to know, and wrong to come anyway, and both things were true at the same time, and would remain true for the rest of her life. Vivian's face was not the face of someone who had spent 3 days arriving at something honest. It was the face of someone who had made a different kind of calculation entirely. "You came," Vivian said. "I came," Clara said. What happened next happened very quickly. Vivian spoke first. She had always been the one to speak first, to set the terms of a conversation before anyone else could, and she did it now, with the same control she had deployed in every room Clara had ever watched her walk into. "I know you're planning to go to the law firm," she said. Not an accusation. A statement of known information, delivered flatly. "And I know you're probably thinking about going to the police as well." "I am," Clara said. The rain was falling steadily. Her hair was already wet. The bridge lamp behind Vivian made a pale halo in the mist. "You can't do that," Vivian said. "I can," Clara said. "Listen to me," Vivian said. And now there was something different in her voice, something underneath the control. Not quite fear, but something adjacent to it. The tension of a person who has been maintaining a structure for a long time, and can feel it developing cracks. The money isn't sitting in an account that can simply be returned. It was moved. It was used in ways that created other connections. If you start asking official questions, things will come out that are bigger than just what happened between us. There are people involved who will be affected by this, and those people do not respond to disruption quietly. Clara looked at her. "That's not my concern, Vivian." "It becomes your concern when you're the person who caused the disruption," Vivian said. She took a single step forward. They were close to the railing on the downstream side of the bridge. The river below was dark and quick. Clara could hear it, that particular sound of moving water carrying weight, purposeful and relentless. "Think about what you're about to do to this family. Mom and Dad would lose everything. Patrick would leave. Everything I have built would come apart. For what? For money that you didn't even know about? You have been fine, Clara. You've always been fine. The shop is profitable. You have your flat. You manage." "I manage," Clara repeated. Her voice was very quiet. "That's what I do, isn't it? I manage. And you decide what I'm allowed to know. And you take what you want. And I manage the remainder." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You told Adam I was unstable," Clara said. "You took my grandmother's money. You made my decisions for me for 14 months, and probably longer. And every time I managed with whatever was left, you took it as confirmation that what you'd done was acceptable." She looked at her sister and felt something settle in her chest, heavy and final and clear. "I am not going to manage this, Vivian. I am going to report it." She turned to leave. She had turned entirely away from Vivian and was walking. She had taken 3 steps. The 4th step never landed the way she intended, because Vivian's hands came from behind her, both palms flat against the back of her shoulders, with a force that was not impulsive or out of control, but deliberate, the force of a decision that had already been made. And Clara was walking near the railing, because the footpath on the bridge was narrow, and the railing was right there, and it caught the backs of her knees at exactly the wrong moment. Then there was nothing beneath her feet. The fall was very brief. The bridge was not high, but it was high enough, and the river below was deep enough and moving fast enough after days of autumn rain, and Clara hit the water with her arms out and her lungs full from a gasp she had taken in the one moment of open air between the bridge and the surface. The cold hit her like something solid, not like temperature at all, like impact. Every system in her body that had been functional and ready went briefly offline, all at the same moment, in response to a cold so complete it felt like the absence of everything. She went under. The current took her. She had not understood, standing on the bridge all those times she had driven past it, how strong a river moved when it had been fed by rain. It did not feel like water. It felt like a direction, an irresistible direction, and everything she attempted to do that was not in that direction cost enormous effort and produced very little result. She kicked. She pulled her arms through the water. She had been a reasonable swimmer growing up, the practical kind, pool laps and summer lakes, nothing that had prepared her for this. She surfaced, gasping. She turned herself in the water and looked for the bank. It was there. Not far. In the near dark she could see the edge of it, a dark line of reeds and earth, close enough that she believed for one moment that she could reach it. She swam toward it with everything she had. Her arms were already heavy. The cold had moved into her muscles with a speed she had not expected. She was still fighting, but the effort of fighting was costing her in a way she could feel. A rapid, steady withdrawal from a reserve she had not known had limits. She made progress. She could see the reeds more clearly. She kicked harder. She reached further. Her fingers caught something, and she pulled, and the something was wet grass, the edge of the bank, and she got one hand onto solid earth. Then the current found an angle, and pulled sideways, and her hand lost the grass, and she was in the water again, and this time, the going under was different. This time, the coming back was slower. She had read once, years ago in a school lesson about outdoor safety, that the danger of cold water is not the cold itself, but what the cold does to your decision-making, the way it narrows your thinking down to the most immediate single thing, and removes your ability to plan even 2 steps ahead. She understood that now from the inside. She could not think about the bank or the direction or the angle. She could only think about the next breath, and the next, and the next. She thought about Nora. She thought very specifically about Nora's voice on the phone saying, "I'll be here, you know where I am," and she wanted, with a force that surprised her given how little energy she had left, to hear that voice again. She thought about her grandmother's letter in her jacket, now dissolved entirely. She thought about the money and the shop and the small life that had been managed for her by other people's decisions. And she felt, with the part of her that was still fully operational, an anger that was not helpless at all but was very specific and very targeted. Not at the cold, not at the river, but at the idea of being taken before she had had the chance to make any of it right. She did not want to die here, not in this river, not because of Vivian. She surfaced for what she understood, somewhere below conscious thought, was probably the last productive time she had. Her arms moved, but they were no longer swimming. They were maintaining something but not advancing it. The bank was away somewhere in the dark. The bridge was behind her. The current had carried her further than she realized. The dark was coming in at the edges. She could feel it. Not sleep, not peace, just the narrowing. She fought it. She kicked. She kept her face above the water. She held on to the particular, stubborn core of herself that had been holding on her entire life, that had opened the shop every morning at 7, and filled the orders, and did not stop, and she held on to it with everything she had left. And then a hand closed around her arm. Firm, sure, certain, not reaching or scrabbling but gripping with the conviction of someone who had located what they were looking for, and was not going to release it. And then she was being pulled, and the direction was no longer the current's direction. It was up and sideways, toward the bank, and she could not help. But she was not fighting it either, and the cold was still total, but something else was present in the water beside her, something large and warm and entirely committed. They came out of the river together, onto the bank, onto wet grass and earth, and she heard herself coughing before she fully understood that she was out of the water, a violent and involuntary sound that her body produced without her permission. And water came out of her lungs, and she coughed again, and she breathed, and the breathing was terrible and effortful, and it was also the best thing that had ever happened to her. She was lying on her side on the bank of the river, and she was breathing, and she was alive. She was also completely incapable of moving. She could hear the rain. She could feel the grass against her cheek. She could feel the cold still sitting in her muscles, like something that had taken up residence, and was not in any hurry to leave. She tried to open her eyes and managed it for a moment, and saw nothing but dark and wet grass and the reflected glow of a phone screen somewhere above her. She heard a voice. low and even. She could not hear the words, only the tone, which was controlled and precise, the tone of someone giving information rather than reacting to it. Then she heard nothing at all. The dark took her quietly, gently, with much less ceremony than she would have expected. She let it. Damien Cole did not sleep easily, and had not done so for years. This was not something he discussed, because it was not something that required discussion. He had built his life around the things that were true about him, and had learned, over years of managing both himself and the people around him, that the truths which required management, rather than denial, were the ones worth keeping. He was a man who needed less sleep than most people, who thought most clearly in the hours before dawn, and who had developed, over the long practice of late nights and early mornings, a relationship with silence that was not the relationship of a person who is lonely in it, but of a person who is genuinely at home there. He walked the river path on nights when the house was too large, and the quiet inside it had a different quality from the quiet outside. The property on the western edge of town backed onto the river for nearly a half-mile, and he had walked the full length of that boundary dozens of times in the years since he had bought it. He knew every variation of the river's sound. He knew when it was running fast and when it was slow. He knew the sounds of the birds, and the sounds of the wildlife in the reeds, and the sounds the wind made when it came off the water at different times of year. He knew all of it, not because he had studied it, but because he had paid attention, and paying attention to things was how Damien Cole had built everything he had. Cole Industries had begun as a single property investment, made at 22, with money he had earned himself through 3 years of construction work and 2 university summers as a contract draftsman. He had not been given the money or the opportunity. He had calculated carefully, moved precisely, and bought a property that no one else had recognized the value in, because they had not taken the time to understand it properly. He had sold it for more than twice what he paid. Then he had done it again. Then he had built a company around the same principles: patience, precision, and the willingness to look at things longer than other people were prepared to. He was 31 now. Cole Industries was a private investment and property company of significant size, run by people he had selected himself over years, people who shared his standards and his discomfort with imprecision. Owen, who had been with him for 7 years, was the first among them. Dr. Leonard, who handled the medical needs of Damien's staff and the small community of people on the estate, had joined 4 years in. There were others, a security team led by a man named Curtis who had previously worked in private protection, a small legal team, a housekeeper named Edith, who managed the house with the same quiet authority Damien applied to the business. It was not a large group. It was a precisely selected one. People found him difficult to approach, which he had accepted as a consequence of being the person who set the terms in any room he entered. He was not unkind. He was direct, which some people experienced as coldness, and he did not apologize for things that did not warrant an apology, which some people experienced as arrogance. He had stopped worrying about what his manner was experienced as by people who did not know him, because the people who knew him understood it, and the opinion of the people who did not know him was not something he had ever found particularly useful. He walked the river path that night with the rain beginning to come in from the west, a steady, determined rain, the kind that was not going to stop soon. He walked without a light. He had no need of one on this path. He had walked it enough times in the dark to know where every tree root was, and where the path dipped near the third bend, and where the reeds grew in from the right bank, and crowded the walkway down to single file. He heard the sound before he saw anything. It was not dramatic. It was not what he would have described as alarming, exactly, because it was not clear at first what it was. A splash that was large but not sudden, not the sharp impact sound of something thrown or dropped. This was different. It had a quality to it, a weight and a duration, that made him stop walking. He stood still for a moment. The rain fell. The river moved. He listened. And then, seconds later, barely audible beneath the rain, a sound that his body responded to before his mind had fully processed it, the specific, ragged sound of a person trying to breathe in a situation where breathing was not guaranteed. He was already moving toward the river when his mind caught up and confirmed what he was hearing. He came through the reeds at the bank's edge and found the water in front of him, and saw her immediately, a shape in the dark water, moving but not swimming, maintaining something but not advancing it. The particular movement of someone who is using effort to stay at the surface, rather than using effort to get somewhere. The shape was 20 meters downstream, moving fast. He could see an arm above the water. He could see the pale blur of a face when it turned toward him. He pulled off his jacket without stopping and went in. Cold water in October is a specific experience. He had known it before, in controlled circumstances, and it was still something that required the body to make a rapid adjustment, a full system response to the temperature change that manifested first, as the breath going short and tight. He managed it in the way he managed physical challenges, by deciding what was going to happen and then making it happen, his body agreeing, because it had no credible argument against the commitment. He swam toward her. The current was faster than it looked from the bank, which was always the case, the surface of a river lying in a way that conceals its actual speed. He went at an angle, not fighting directly across but using the current's own direction to carry him toward where she would be, rather than where she was. He had learned this from the same place he had learned most useful things, by paying attention to people who knew what they were doing. He reached her just as her face went under. He got his right arm around her from behind, beneath her arms, across her chest, and he felt her weight settle against him, the way unconscious weight settles, total and unprepared. She was not helping him. She was not conscious enough to help him. He turned in the water and kicked for the bank. It was harder than he had expected. The current and her weight together required more than he had calculated, and the cold was doing what it did to muscles over time. He used everything he had, his legs and his right arm, and the stubborn, practical refusal to accept an outcome he had not chosen. He kept going. He kept going. He kept going. They came out on the bank 20 meters downstream from where he had entered the water. He pulled her clear of the water's edge, onto the grass, and turned her on her side, and she coughed. The sound of it was violent and involuntary, and the best possible thing he could have heard in that moment. Her body was doing what bodies do when they have been allowed another chance. It was removing what didn't belong. She coughed again. Her chest moved. She breathed. He straightened up. He was very wet and very cold, and he was not thinking about either of those things. He called Owen. Owen answered on the second ring. "You're awake late," Owen said, which was his standard greeting for Damien's nighttime calls. "River," Damien said. "I have someone who was in the water. I need Leonard at the house in 20 minutes. A pause. Not surprise. Owen had been with him long enough that surprises had largely ceased to register as surprises. "Are they alive?" "She is," Damien said. "She needs immediate attention. Hypothermia risk. She wasn't fully conscious when I pulled her out." "I'll have Leonard there," Owen said. "Curtis will open the east gate. Are you all right?" "Get Leonard," Damien said, which was his way of answering questions about himself that he did not want to discuss. He ended the call. He crouched beside her on the bank. She was breathing. Her color was very bad, but her breathing was continuing. And breathing, he had been told by Leonard on various occasions, was the primary requirement for the recovery of almost everything else. He looked at her face. She was young, he thought, mid-20s at most, with dark hair, and the particular stillness of unconsciousness that can look either peaceful or severe, depending on the context. In this context, it was severe. He gathered her up, one arm under her knees and one beneath her shoulders, and he carried her along the river path toward the estate. She weighed less than he expected. She was too light for someone her height and frame, the lightness of someone who had been running on not quite enough for a while. He noticed this in the way he noticed most things, without deciding to. The house was lit from within when he came through the east gate. Edith had lights on in the entrance hall. Curtis held the side door open and said nothing, which was Curtis's particular skill. Dr. Leonard's car pulled into the drive as Damien came through the door. Leonard was out of the car and inside in under a minute, which was one of the many reasons Damien valued him. "Guest room on the east wing," Damien said. "It's the warmest." Leonard followed without questions, which was also one of the reasons Damien valued him. He laid her down on the bed in the east guest room, and Leonard came in with his bag and said, in the mild, firm tone of someone who had been providing medical care for 20 years, "Everyone else out, please. Give me room." And then he looked at Damien specifically, and added, "You as well. Go and change. You're not helping her by being wet." Damien went into the hallway. He stood in the hallway outside the closed door. Owen appeared with a dry shirt and a towel, which he accepted and used, and then he continued to stand in the hallway outside the closed door. Owen stood with him for a while, and then went to make tea, and came back with 2 cups, and offered one, and Damien took it, and drank without tasting it. "You want to know who she is?" Owen said. "I want to know she's going to be all right," Damien said. "Leonard will tell you that." "I know." Owen drank his tea. "What was she doing in the river at this hour?" "I don't know," Damien said. He had not tried to work out the answer to this yet. He had been present to one thing at a time, which was his way of managing moments that required it. Right now the one thing was the door, and what was happening behind it. "She went in from the bridge," Damien said. "The current had carried her that far by the time I got to her. She didn't jump. Her arms were out when she hit the water." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Someone put her in," he said. "That is the correct inference," Damien said. They stood in the hallway together in silence. The house was quiet around them. Outside, the rain continued. Leonard came out once to say she was responding. Her temperature was rising, and that she would be closely monitored through the night. He said it with the professional containment of someone reporting facts, but his eyes met Damien's for a moment before he went back in, and Damien understood that he was also saying that it had been close. He remained in the hallway. By 4 in the morning, the rain had stopped. By 5, the first gray light was showing at the window at the end of the corridor. Owen had gone to find a blanket at some point, and had come back with it, and draped it over his own shoulders, and sat on the floor beside the wall, and fallen asleep sitting there, with the quiet adaptability of someone who had learned to rest wherever rest was available. Leonard came out at 5:30 and said her temperature was stable and her breathing was strong, and that she was sleeping naturally. Damien stood where he was. He looked at the door. He put his hands in his pockets. He thought about the sound he had heard from the river path, that specific, particular sound that his body had responded to before his mind had fully processed it. He thought about what it had meant. He thought about carrying her through the east gate with her weight in his arms, and the way the house lights had looked from the path, warm and certain in the dark. He had not thought about anyone's weight in his arms in a very long time. He went to stand by the window at the end of the corridor, and looked out at the estate in the early morning, the gray light coming in across the grounds, the garden below still wet from the rain, the trees at the far edge beginning to show their autumn color. He stood there, and was quiet, and let the morning come. And he did not go to bed, and he did not particularly want to. When Leonard came out again at 7:30 and said she was awake, Damien was still at the window. He turned. He stood for a moment with his hand on the frame. Then he walked back down the hallway and opened the door. The ceiling was unfamiliar. Clara registered this before anything else, before her own name, before the previous night, before even the complete fact of where she was. The ceiling was high and pale, with a plaster detail at the center that looked older than anything in the flat she had lived in for 3 years, and the light coming through the gap in the curtains was the clear, early light of a morning that had come after rain. She lay completely still, with her eyes open, and let her body report its situation, before she asked her mind to do anything useful. She was warm. She was dry. She was wearing clothes that were not hers. Her lungs felt tender in the way they did when she had been very ill, a sensitivity that was not quite pain, but was the echo of where pain had been. Her muscles had a heaviness she recognized as exhaustion, pushed through to the other side of itself. She sat up too fast and the room tilted, and she put her hands flat on the bed and waited for it to settle. The bed was large, and the sheets were the soft, expensive variety that signals, without stating it, that someone in this house had made considered choices. The furniture was good, solid, unhurried. Nothing in the room was trying to impress anyone. It was simply a room that had been put together with care and left to be what it was. There was a chair beside the window with a folded robe on it. The curtains were thick and a dark cream color, and someone had opened them a fraction, but not all the way. Near the door, in a chair she had not noticed immediately, was a man. He was older than she expected, 60 perhaps, with white hair and glasses and the expression of a person who had sat beside beds watching patients wake up enough times that the process had ceased to be in any way dramatic. He was holding a folder and had been reading it when she sat up. He looked at her with an easy, professional calm. "Good morning," he said. "Take your time. You are safe here. My name is Dr. Leonard. I have been looking after you since last night." "Where am I?" Clara said. Her voice came out rough, thickened by the hours of sleep and whatever her throat had been through in the river. "You're at Cole House," he said. "A private estate on the western edge of town. You were brought here last night, after being found in the river." She absorbed this in the way she absorbed large things, by taking it apart into its components and addressing each one. Coal house, western edge of town, found in the river, brought here, last night. Someone pulled me out, she said. Yes, Dr. Leonard said. The owner of this property. Who is the owner of this property? Damien Cole, Dr. Leonard said, and watched her face to see if the name registered. It did. Not in the way celebrity names registered, with a flash of association and accumulated image. It registered the way serious names registered, the way names register that you have heard in certain specific contexts, lowered voices, careful references, the name attached to buildings you've seen and amounts you have not. She had heard the name Cole once, at a Chamber of Commerce event she had attended on behalf of the shop, and the woman beside her had lowered her voice when she said it, not from fear, but from the particular respect that accumulates around a name that has been operating at a certain level for long enough. She did not know the man. She knew the name. He found me in the river, she said. He did, Dr. Leonard confirmed. He pulled you out and carried you here. You had been in the water long enough to be at serious risk of hypothermia. Your core temperature when I first assessed you was significantly lower than it should have been. He paused. You are considerably warmer now. Your lungs are clear. I'd like you to rest for at least another day, but there is no lasting damage I can identify. All right, she said. She was running through what had happened. The bridge, Vivian's hands, the water, the bank, the hand on her arm. She held each fact carefully, the way you hold something that is still warm from wherever it came from. I need to use a phone. Of course, he said. I'll have someone bring you one. He stood, folder in hand. Are you in pain anywhere? Not exactly, she said. My lungs are sore. That will ease over the next day or two, he said. Eat something when you feel able. There will be food brought to you. Try not to stand up too quickly for the time being. He moved toward the door with the unhurried efficiency of a person who has many more things to do but is not in a hurry about any of them. At the door he paused. You're welcome to ask any questions you like, either of me or of Owen, who you'll meet shortly. He'll sort out the phone. He left. She sat in the large, quiet bed and listened to the house around her, which was the kind of quiet that large, well-built houses have. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of contained space, walls thick enough to hold everything inside. She thought about Vivian. She thought about the bridge. She thought about the deliberate, flat quality of Vivian's face in the lamplight, the face of a person who had already decided. She was here. She was alive. The first two requirements of any next step were therefore met. The door opened and a man came in carrying a phone, a cup of tea, and a plate with 2 pieces of buttered toast on it. He was broad-shouldered and moved through the room with an easy efficiency that came from knowing the space well. He set the phone and the food on the bedside table with the brisk, practical tidiness of someone who has done this kind of errand many times before. I'm Owen, he said. I manage most things around here. The phone is connected to our internal network, so it's secure. Use it for whatever you need. He looked at her with the direct, unperforming attention of someone who assessed people quickly and accurately. The tea is hot. The toast is buttered. You should eat something. Dr. Leonard's orders, technically, but also just sensible. Thank you, she said. Damien will want to speak with you when you're ready, he said. No rush on that. He's patient. He moved toward the door and then turned back. Your jacket and other things were quite damaged from the water. Some were not recoverable. We went through the pockets for identification purposes. Nothing personal was shared outside this house. A pause. I mention that because people usually wonder. I did wonder, she said. He nodded once, as though confirming that she was the kind of person who would wonder, and that this was a characteristic he approved of. Then he left. She drank the tea in careful sips, warming her hands around the cup. She looked at the toast and realized she was hungry, which was a good sign. She ate 1 piece. Then she picked up the phone. She called Nora. Nora answered before the second ring completed, which told Clara that she had been either waiting by the phone or had Clara's number specifically at the top of her screen. Clara, her name in Nora's voice, in exactly that tone, said more than anything that followed it. Where are you? I've been calling your phone since last night. My phone didn't survive the river, Clara said. Silence. The river, Nora said. I need to tell you what happened, Clara said. And I need you to stay steady while I do it. Tell me. Nora said. She told her. She was clinical and complete, because she needed Nora's analytical mind on the facts rather than in reaction to them. She told her about the bridge and Vivian, and the water, and the hand that had found her. When she finished, the silence on Nora's end was very controlled. Vivian pushed you into the river, Nora said. Yes. And you're at Cole House. Apparently. Damien Cole's property. Yes. A longer pause. Are you safe there? I think so, Clara said. She considered it again. Yes. I think I am. What do you need from me right now? I need you to not do anything yet, Clara said. I need to understand where I am and what I'm doing first. All right, Nora said. Clara could hear the specific effort it was costing her. I'll be here. She ate the second piece of toast. She got up slowly, carefully, steadied herself against the bedside table for a moment, and put on the robe from the chair. She opened the curtains the rest of the way. The estate was large, more extensive than she had realized from the bed, grounds that ran in 3 directions as far as she could see, with a walled garden directly below the window, a terrace beyond it, and trees at the far edge that were turning the colors of autumn. It was a serious piece of land. She had understood that the name meant money, but she had not quite understood the particular variety of money that expressed itself in this way. In space, in stone, in the patient accumulation of good soil. She put on her shoes, which were dry, and had been placed near the door, and she went out into the hallway. It was wide and quiet, with a dark wood floor and walls the color of old pages. She stood in the doorway of the room and looked both ways, taking her bearings. To the right, the hallway ended at a large window overlooking the east side of the grounds. To the left, it led to a staircase. She heard movement from the direction of the stairs, the sound of someone on a lower floor, a door, a voice saying something she couldn't quite hear. And then the door nearest the top of the staircase opened, and he was there. She had formed some kind of expectation, she realized, because she always did. The name had attached an image to itself in her imagination, over the months since she had first heard it. Something polished and deliberate. The image of money that wants to be seen. She had been wrong about that. He was tall. He was wearing dark trousers and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was looking at her, with an expression she could not immediately characterize, because it contained no obvious social performance. Not warmth constructed for the occasion. Not professional distance, just looking at her, directly and without decoration. You're up, he said. I'm up, she said. How do you feel? She considered the question honestly. Better than I probably have any right to, given last night. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter. He took a step into the hallway, far enough that she could see him more completely. He was perhaps 7 or 8 years older than her, 30 or so, and his face was the kind that accumulated information and gave very little of it back. He stood easily in the space and did not seem to require anything from her. I'd like to go to the police, she said. She had decided this before coming out of the room. I know, he said. My sister pushed me off a bridge, she said. I want to report it. Come downstairs, he said. There's something I need to show you first. He turned and went down the staircase, without looking back, to see if she was following, which she found, in an unexpected way, rather respectful. She followed. The house was different downstairs, the same quality of deliberate, unpretentious good taste, but with more signs of daily use. A coat on a rack by the back door. Boots. Owen in the kitchen moving things around with focused efficiency. The smell of coffee. She followed Damien through a corridor to a room at the back of the house. A working room with bookshelves and 2 screens on a wide desk, and papers organized in the specific way of someone who works with information and needs to be able to locate any piece of it quickly. He put a sheet of paper on the table in front of her. It was a printed list of names. She looked at it. She recognized 3 of them immediately. She had heard one name in relation to the local police administration. She recognized another from a council matter her father had mentioned once. The third she had heard at a dinner at the Hale family home, said in passing by Patrick's father. Some of these, she said carefully. The Hale family has held influence over the regional police committee for 6 years, Damien said. He said it the way he seemed to say everything, without drama, without seeking reaction, as information to be considered. Patrick Hale's father has been a direct member since the committee was restructured. The officer at the top of that list has a financial relationship with the Hale estate that predates his current position. He paused. If you go to the local station tonight and report what happened, the report will be filed, marked as received, and given very little attention. Your sister's family connections ensure that. Another pause, shorter. She also filed a missing person report this morning. Clara looked up. She filed a missing person report. Before 9 o'clock, he said, while she believed you were not alive to challenge it. Clara set the list down. The understanding arrived fully formed. Vivian had covered her tracks before the sun came up. She had been, as she always was, 3 steps ahead. She had calculated the narrative and started building it before the water had even finished settling. She thinks I'm dead, Clara said. She has every reason to, Damien said. Which means she's currently the bereaved sister, Clara said slowly. And I'm currently a missing woman, with an alleged history of mental instability. And if I appear at a police station connected to her circle of influence, the story becomes whatever she makes it before I can say a word. Yes, Damien said. She looked at the list of names again, then she looked at him. What would you suggest instead? He looked at her steadily. Patience, he said. Evidence. And the right people, rather than the wrong ones. She thought about Vivian standing on that bridge. She thought about 14 months, and 3 letters, and Adam Fletcher, and the shop, and every morning, she had opened it at 7, and done the work, because there was work to do, and she did it. She thought about the amount on the second page of that letter, the amount that had been hers from the moment her grandmother put her name on a document, the amount that was hers right now, by right, regardless of what anyone had decided to do with it. She thought about doing this right. She thought about doing it so that when it was done, it could not be undone. All right, she said, tell me what evidence looks like. He sat down. She sat across from him. Owen brought coffee without being asked. And Damien Cole, with the same unhurried, direct precision he appeared to apply to everything, began to explain. She did not leave. This was the decision, and she had made it cleanly, and without the circular revisiting that complicated decisions sometimes required. She had made it in the downstairs room with the papers and the 2 screens and the quiet, direct presence of a man who had told her the truth, without softening it, and had not asked her to be grateful, and she had made it because it was the correct decision, and when she made correct decisions, she did not waste time second-guessing them. The east guest room was hers for as long as she needed it. Owen had arranged dry clothes, practical things in approximately her size, which told her he was a person who could estimate these things accurately and efficiently and without making them awkward. She had her robe and her clean clothes, and the phone she was using for communication with Nora, and she had the long days of a house she did not yet know, with nothing to do in them but recover and think. She recovered faster than she expected. By the 3rd day, the tenderness in her lungs had largely subsided, and her energy had returned to something near normal, and the heaviness that the river had put in her muscles had worked itself out through sleep and warmth, and the passage of time that the body requires when it has been through something significant. Dr. Leonard came each morning, checked her over with professional thoroughness, and reported that she was progressing well. He had the bedside manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that patients did not need to be charmed. They needed to be informed and believed, and this was exactly the manner Clara preferred. On the 4th morning, she found the garden. She had seen it from her window on the 1st morning. A walled garden directly behind the house, separated from the main lawn by a low stone wall with a wooden gate. She had been curious about it, in the particular way she was curious about outdoor things, the way her work had trained her to notice growing things, and the state they were in, and what they could become with attention. She went through the wooden gate on the 4th morning, and saw immediately what she had suspected from the window. The garden was a good garden that had been left too long without care. The rose beds that lined the inner walls had grown into each other, in the way that rose beds do when they are left to their own devices for a season or 2, the new growth tangling through the old, the shape of each plant lost inside the larger shape they had collectively become. The gravel paths between them were reclaimed at every edge by grass, and at one section entirely by a low-growing plant she recognized as a creeper that had arrived on the wind and decided to stay. The wooden bench at the far end was weathered to the silver gray of old timber that has been through enough seasons to stop pretending to be new. The frame of a metal arch between 2 sections of the garden had a climbing rose on it that had been ignoring its structure for long enough to have become entirely its own creation. but the bones were excellent. She could see the design under the neglect, the way she could see the correct arrangement in a mixed bunch of flowers before she had touched a single stem. Someone had laid this garden out with care and knowledge, had planned the proportions and the pathways and the variety of what grew here. It had been something genuinely beautiful, and it could be that again. She found a pair of old gloves in the stone outbuilding beside the gate. The shears hanging on the wall were rusted, but had a good blade beneath the rust, and she worked at them for a few minutes until they opened and closed without catching. Then she went to the nearest rose bed and began. She did not think about what she was doing in terms of permission or propriety. She was in a garden that needed work, and she had hands and the right tools, and she understood roses. This was sufficient. She cleared one section, pulling the invasive growth away from the base of an established climber, and then moved to the path edges, and then to the next bed, and she worked with the particular focused pleasure of someone doing a task they are genuinely suited to. Owen appeared in the gateway an hour in, and stood for a moment, observing what she had done. He went away, and came back with a better pair of shears, already sharpened, and a kneeling pad, and he set them beside her without comment or inquiry, which was exactly the right response. She thanked him. He said it was no trouble, and left. She worked in the garden each morning for the rest of the first week. She did not finish it, because it would take considerably more than a week to finish it properly. But she worked her way through each section with the same methodical patience she had always brought to things she cared about. And by the end of the week, the structure of the garden had reappeared. The paths clear, the rose beds shaped, the climber on the metal arch given direction, the bench swept of debris. On her second afternoon in the garden, she happened to look up at the house and saw Damien at an upper window. He was looking at the garden, not at the grounds in general, specifically at the garden, and he was looking at it for long enough that she could tell he was taking in what had changed. She could not read his expression from the distance, but she did not look away quickly either. She looked at him for a moment, and then he was not there anymore, and she went back to what she was doing. At dinner on the fourth evening, which they ate at the kitchen table, because the formal dining room was, as Owen explained without being asked, a room that was never actually used for anything, Damien asked how her hand was. She had cut one finger that afternoon on a thorn she had not been careful enough about. She had not thought anyone had noticed. "Fine," she said. "I should have been paying more attention." "You've cleared the eastern section," he said. "It was overdue," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No one has touched that garden in 4 years," he said. She considered this. "It shows," she said. "But the structure is good. Whoever planted it knew what they were doing." "My mother," he said. It was the kind of thing said simply, without elaboration or invitation, the way you mention a fact that belongs to you and does not require anyone else's response. "Then it was worth keeping," she said. He looked at her for one more moment, and then ate his dinner, and they did not speak again for a while, which was one of the things she had noticed about being in this house. Silence was not uncomfortable here. It was simply what happened when there was nothing worth filling it with. On the sixth evening she was in the library when Owen came to the doorway. "You should see this," he said. He crossed to the television, turned it on to a specific channel, and then left, without saying anything else. She stood in front of the television alone, and she saw Vivian. It was a local news segment. Vivian was standing on the steps of the police station in the center of town, wearing a dark coat, her hair perfectly composed, her expression calibrated to the exact degree of grief and concern that read as genuine on camera. She had been doing this since she was old enough to understand that how you looked was as important as what you said, and on camera she was extraordinarily accomplished at it. "Clara has always struggled," Vivian was saying, and her voice carried just the right weight, just the right catch in it. "We've tried to support her over the years, but she can withdraw very suddenly. We haven't heard from her in days, and we're worried. If anyone has seen her, please, we just want to know she's safe," the reporter asked when she had last seen Clara. Vivian answered with a practiced, patient sadness, mentioning the flower shop, mentioning that Clara had not seemed herself lately, mentioning how much the family was concerned for her well-being. Not a word about a bridge, not a word about a river, not a word about anything except the careful, compassionate narrative of a worried family member doing everything she could. Clara became aware that Damien had entered the room. She did not know how long he had been there. She did not turn around. "She's standing on those steps calling me unstable," Clara said. "Yes," he said. "While she knows exactly where I was, and why." Yes. And anyone who sees that report and knows my sister will believe every word of it. Most of them, he said. She turned around. The anger was there, inside her chest, solid and pressing. Not the raw and unmanaged kind, but the kind that has had time to settle into something purposeful. She wanted to walk out of this house and drive directly to the nearest camera she could find. She wanted to speak. She had a great deal to say. Acting now would undo what we're building, Damien said. He was standing near the door, not close to her, giving her room. His voice had the same quality it always had, calm without being cold, direct without being unkind. I know that, she said. The words came out tight. She filed that report as a frame, he said. If you appear now, before we have the full picture, she adjusts the narrative. She has the people to do it, and she has the story already set. The conversation becomes about your mental health, and not about what she did. Clara looked at the television. Vivian's face had been replaced by the anchors, moving on to the next story. She looked at the space where Vivian's face had been. She said the same thing to Adam, she said. Almost the same words. She has been building this particular story about me for years. I know, he said. She built it specifically so it would be there when she needed it, Clara said. She needed it because she was always planning for the possibility that I would eventually find out what she'd done. And she needed a way to make sure that when I did find out and tried to speak, no one would believe me. That is the correct reading, Damien said. She turned to look at him. He was standing in the same easy, undemanding way he always stood, hands at his sides, watching her with that direct, non-performing attention. She had initially found his directness slightly uncomfortable, the way directness can be uncomfortable when you are not used to someone simply meaning what they say. She was getting used to it. What do we need to build the right picture, she said. Documentation of the financial activity, he said. A connection between the money that was taken from you and wherever it went. Evidence of who else is involved, because I believe there is someone else, or more than one someone. He paused, and your testimony, which is the most important piece, but which only has full weight when it arrives alongside evidence that cannot be dismissed. How long? She said. Not as long as you might think, he said. Your friend Nora has already found something. She straightened. What kind of something? Owen spoke with her this evening through the secure channel, he said. Come and sit down. I'll show you what she found. She sat in the library with him for the next 2 hours. Owen brought tea at some point, and left it, and was gone. The fire had been lit at some point, and the room was warm. Outside the windows, the grounds were dark and still, autumn pressing quietly against the glass. He showed her what Nora had found, and what his own team had been pulling together since the morning after she had arrived. She listened with the same full, thorough attention she had always brought to things that required it, and as she listened, she felt the shape of what had been done to her become clearer, which was not a comfort in the way that clarity is sometimes said to be a comfort. It was the specific, useful kind of clarity that tells you exactly what you are dealing with, so you can deal with it properly. My sister didn't just take my money, she said, when he finished. No, he said. She used it, Clara said. She used my name and my grandmother's estate as part of something that goes considerably further than a family theft. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him. In the lamplight of the library, his face was very clear and very still. He was watching her in the way he always watched her, without urgency, without pressure, simply present and entirely attentive. Then let's make it right, she said, all of it. Something shifted in his expression. It was brief and quiet, but she saw it. Yes, he said. A week into her stay at Cole House, Nora found a way through. The channel Owen had set up was simple in principle and careful in practice. A routing arrangement that moved communication through a private network and avoided the standard paths that anyone paying attention might monitor. Clara had sent Nora a carefully worded message 5 days earlier, after Owen had explained the arrangement to her, and she had confirmed she understood both how to use it and why it mattered. Nora had responded within the hour, which told Clara that her friend had been at her phone in the specific way of someone waiting for exactly this kind of contact. The call came through at 8 in the morning. Clara was in the small sitting room at the back of the house that she had quietly made into her working space over the course of the week. She had moved a chair closer to the window. She had a notebook she had found in a desk drawer and had been using for the notes she took during her conversations with Damien. The window looked out over the south side of the grounds, where an old stone wall ran along the property boundary, and the trees beyond it were in full autumn color, deep reds and clear yellows against the pale morning sky. "I've been careful," Nora said, as her first sentence, which meant she had been operating as a paralegal rather than as a friend, which was exactly what the situation required. "I have accessed only what is publicly available. Filed documents, registered entities, publicly searchable accounts." "What did you find?" Clara said. "The flower shop on Millgate Street," Nora said, "has been used as the registered address for 2 separate business entities for the past 3 years. Neither entity has any visible operations. No staff on file, no publicly listed clients or activities, no social presence. They appear to exist purely on paper." Clara looked at the wall outside the window. "But they have bank accounts," she said. "They have bank accounts," Nora confirmed. "And those accounts have received regular incoming payments over an extended period. I cannot see the full account history without legal access, but the registration pattern alone is notable. Entities registered at a business address without the knowledge or consent of the business owner is not standard practice." "I did not consent to any other business using the shop's address," Clara said. "I know," Nora said, "which means Vivian, or someone associated with her, registered those entities using your business address without your knowledge." A pause. "Clara, there's more." "Tell me." "The holding company that those entities appear to connect to is registered at a separate address," Nora said. "But the name on the holding company documents appears in the registered agent information for a company I have seen before. In a case I worked on at the firm 2 years ago, a company that was ultimately found to have been used to launder payments from an offshore account through a domestic front." She paused again, and Clara could hear in the pause the specific quality of someone who is being very careful about what they say next. "The name is connected to activity that the firm's client was prosecuted for, Clara. It is not a small-stakes connection." Clara let this settle. She thought about the neat, orderly apartment with its clean surfaces. She thought about the particular confidence Vivian had always moved through the world with, the confidence of someone who believed they had arranged everything correctly. She thought about what that confidence looked like when you understood what it was standing on. "I need you to send everything you have to Owen," she said. "Already done," Nora said. "I sent it through the channel 10 minutes before I called you." "Nora," Clara said. "Don't thank me," Nora said immediately. "Just be careful." She ended the call and went to find Damien. He was in the study with Owen, and Owen had the documents Nora had sent already arranged in a sequence on the desk beside the printed records his own team had been compiling. The 2 sets of information sat beside each other, and the overlap between them was immediate and significant, the kind of overlap that is not coincidence but confirmation. Damien read through Nora's documents with the focused, rapid attention of someone who was already familiar with most of what they described from a different angle. When he finished, he sat back and looked at Clara. "Your friend is thorough," he said. "She is," Clara said. "The holding company name appears in our records as well," he said. He pointed to a page in the company's own compiled documents. "On the property development side, there is a connection between the development vehicle and 2 land acquisitions in this region over the past 4 years. Land that was purchased at below market value through a process that was not contested at the time, but that, reviewed in light of this additional information, raises significant questions about how the valuation was set. So the money that came through the shop's registered address connected to a holding company that also had connections to property deals," she said. "Yes," he said, "and the local official who approved the valuations on those property deals is the same official whose name appears in both your friend's research and our own." He paused. The Voss family shop was one node in a network that has been operating across several different sectors. It was chosen because it was small and unremarkable, and beneath the level of scrutiny that would have been applied to larger businesses. Your name, your grandmother's estate, the inheritance money, all of it was used because it was clean. Because it was legitimately yours. That was the value of it to the people who used it. Clara looked at the pages spread across the desk, and she let herself understand, fully and completely, what had been done to her, and what it meant. Not just that her sister had taken her money. That her sister had taken her name, and her grandmother's name, and the clean record of an honest family inheritance, and used them as components in something considerably larger and more damaging than a private family theft. She had been used. Her silence, her compliance, her habit of managing without question had been factored in as a resource. She had been the reliable, quiet, manageable one. She had been that so completely and so consistently that she had become useful to people who needed reliability and quietness and manageability in a component they did not intend to involve in the decision-making. She looked at Damien. She picked me because she knew I wouldn't ask questions, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. She has known me my whole life, Clara said. She knew exactly what I would do and what I wouldn't. She knew I would keep running the shop. She knew I would manage whatever was given to me. She knew I would not look too closely at things, because I had been taught, from the beginning, that looking too closely was not something I was supposed to do. Yes, he said again. That was not a coincidence, she said. It was a design. He looked at her for a long moment. Owen was very quiet on the other side of the desk. Yes, Damien said. She turned away from the papers. She looked at the window, which faced north, and showed the property wall and the sky above it, gray and low. She thought about her mother's voice in the kitchen, smooth and deflecting. She thought about every dinner at Heron Lane, where the conversation had turned to Vivian's achievements, and Clara had sat and been supportive and made the right sounds and never asked for equal space in the room. She thought about how natural it had all felt, which was the most disturbing part. I want to talk to your contact, she said. The person you described as the right people. Not yet, Damien said. When we have the full structure. When there is nothing missing, and nothing that can be challenged. He paused. 2 or 3 more days. She turned back. 2 or 3 more days, she repeated. Yes. She nodded. Then she said, without planning to, why didn't you go to bed that night? He looked at her. The night I arrived, she said. Owen told me this morning that you stood in the hallway for most of the night. She had asked Owen about it the previous day, simply and directly, and Owen had answered simply and directly, which was the way things worked in this house. You didn't know who I was. You could have left me with Leonard and been done with it. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her, with the same steady, undecorated attention he brought to everything. I don't know how to give you a useful answer to that, he said. I stayed because I stayed. I didn't analyze the reason at the time. What would the analysis say now? She said. He held her gaze. That I was not comfortable leaving until I knew you were all right, he said. That is the most honest account I have. She looked at him. She thought about the version of that night she would never see directly. A man standing in a hallway for hours because he was not comfortable leaving. A man who had found a stranger in a river and had carried her to the warmest room in his house and had stood in the corridor outside and had not moved until morning. That's a good answer, she said quietly. She went back to the sitting room. She sat in the chair by the window with her notebook and wrote everything down in the methodical, thorough way she wrote everything down. And she thought about design and what it meant when the design of a life had been someone else's and not your own. That evening, after dinner, she and Damien sat in the library for the 3rd or 4th time that week. The fire was on. The conversation moved through the documentation and what remained to be confirmed, and then, as it had begun to do in the last few evenings, it moved into other territory. She told him about Adam without planning to. She had been talking about what it meant to have trusted someone whose judgment she had relied on, and the word trusted opened something she had not intended to open. And she talked about Adam for 10 minutes without stopping. The whole shape of it, how they had met, what he had been like, the specific quality of attention he had given her that she had found so rare, the way the cooling had come, and she had not been able to understand it, the 2 years of blaming herself. When she stopped, Damien was looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had come to recognize as his most genuine mode, completely present, not performing attentiveness but actually in it, hearing what she said and what she didn't say with equal care. You believed it was your failing, he said. For 2 years, she said. But it was a lie, he said, from the first day of it. From the first phone call Vivian made, she said, before he and I had even had a chance to find out what we actually were. He was quiet for a moment. The people who most deserve trust are the ones who get the least of it, he said, because the people who used what they were trusted with spent it in ways that make the next person pay. He paused. That is the specific damage that a person like your sister does. Not just the money, not just the relationship. The willingness to try again. She looked at him. You understand that from experience, she said. I do, he said. He said it without offering more, in the way he sometimes spoke, giving the fact without the story, unless asked. She asked, what happened? He told her. Not a long story, and not one he told with self-pity. A business partner in the early days, a man he had trusted completely, who had been in the process of extracting a significant portion of coal industry's capital through a series of transactions that Damien had not caught for long enough. He had caught it eventually. The outcome had been managed, but the management had cost more than the money, because the question it left behind, the question of how he had not seen it, was not one he had been able to answer to his own satisfaction. Yes, he said. Why? He looked at her. Because it was mine, he said. The betrayal was not the company. The company was just where the betrayal happened. I was not going to let those two things be the same. She sat with that for a long time. That's a useful way to think about it, she said finally. It is, when you can manage to hold it clearly, he said. It took time. She looked at the fire. She thought about the shop on Millgate Street, which was also not the betrayal, which was where the betrayal had been located, which was still a thing she had built and made good, and which belonged to her by years of effort, regardless of what else had been happening around it. She thought about that with a new kind of clarity. She also thought about the man across from her, who was looking at the fire as well, and the way he had described his own experience with the same plain, undefended quality he brought to everything, and the way she felt in this room, this house, this circumstance that had arrived so violently and was now, somehow, arranged around something that felt more real than most things she had known in a long time. She did not say any of this. It was too early and too large, and she was not someone who said things before she understood them. But she noticed it, clearly and without looking away. The full picture arrived over 3 days. Damien's team worked with the documents Nora had compiled and the records they had built themselves, and by the end of the 3rd day, they had constructed something that was no longer a collection of pieces, but a structure, a design, laid out in full. Clara sat with Damien and Owen in the study on the evening of the 3rd day, and looked at what the 3 days had produced, and the looking was the specific kind of looking that happens when the thing in front of you is larger than you had expected it to be. The Voss family flower shop had been used as a registered address for 2 entities that Clara had known nothing about. Those entities had received payments over 3 years from a 3rd entity, a holding company that was the operational center of a financial network involving 4 additional parties. Those parties included a local property developer named Gerald Marsh, a regional official in the planning authority named Oliver Sutton, a private accountant named Carla Drew who had managed the paper structure of the whole arrangement, and a 4th connection that went further than the region, a business registration in an offshore jurisdiction that was the source of the funds being laundered through the domestic structure. The Voss family shop had received no payment for its role. Its role had been to provide a clean domestic address, a legitimate-looking anchor, for entities that needed to appear to have a genuine local footprint. The inheritance money, Clara's grandmother's money, had been moved through accounts associated with the shop after Vivian took control of it, mixed with payments from the wider network in a way that obscured its origin. It had, in effect, been washed clean of its own identity, and distributed through a system that made it impossible to identify, without the kind of detailed tracing that Damien's team had now completed. Clara looked at all of this for a long time without speaking. She didn't take the money because she needed it, she said at last. She needed it initially, Damien said. The debt she described was real, but the money served a second purpose that she either understood from the beginning or was led to understand shortly after. It provided a legitimate source, Clara said. Her debts were cleared with her sister's inheritance. Clean money in, replacing money that had questionable origins. Yes, he said. And the shop's address, in your name, provided cover for the entities that needed a local presence. He paused. Oliver Sutton approved 2 planning applications, connected to Gerald Marsh, in the 18 months following the initial movement of funds, properties that increased significantly in value after approval. The offshore entity received a proportion of the profit. And Oliver Sutton is the name at the top of the list you showed me on my first morning here, Clara said. Yes, Owen said. from his position near the filing cabinet where he had been organizing the physical copies of everything. He is also the oversight contact for the Regional Police Committee, which is why we were concerned about direct local reporting from the beginning. Clara sat back. She looked at the ceiling. The house was very quiet around them except for the fire, which burned steadily in the corner of the study, and the sound of the autumn wind pressing against the windows. "My sister put me at the center of a financial crime," she said, "and then nearly killed me to make sure I could not unravel it." "Yes," Damien said. "And if I had drowned in that river," she said, "the investigation would have been handled locally, by people connected to Oliver Sutton, and would have concluded with a finding of misadventure by a mentally unstable young woman." "Yes," he said. "And Vivian would have been the bereaved sister." "Yes," he said. She let the full weight of it settle. She did not need to be afraid of the weight. She had been carrying heavy things her whole life. This was heavier than most, but it was clear, which made it manageable, and she had always preferred clarity to comfortable uncertainty. She looked at Damien. "I am the only person with the legal standing to open this," she said. "You are the named beneficiary of the estate that the funds originated from," he said. "You are the registered operator of the business whose address was used without your consent. Your direct testimony about what Vivian told you during your confrontation, combined with this documentation, provides a basis that is complete. Then we open it," she said. "Yes," he said. "Who do we take it to?" He looked at her with the particular attention he always brought to things that mattered. "I have a contact," he said. "Federal level, outside the regional structure entirely. A person I trust. How long do you need to set it up?" "2 days," he said, "to compile the final package and make the initial contact." "All right," she said. 2 days. They sat in the study for another hour, working through the remaining questions. What needed to be verified? What was already confirmed? What gaps remained? Owen made notes. Damien answered questions with the same precise, unhurried directness he brought to everything. At some point the working hour ended and they were simply sitting in the room together. The fire had burned lower. The wind outside had settled. Owen had gone to the kitchen at some point and returned with tea and the quiet announcement that he was going to bed and would start fresh in the morning. Clara looked at the papers on the desk. She looked at the documentation of 3 years of damage, laid out with the kind of clarity that made it both undeniable and deeply strange to look at. 3 years. She had been opening the shop every morning at 7 for 3 years, thinking she was running a family business, thinking the struggle was hers to manage, and for all of that time, her name had been sitting on documents she had never agreed to sign. She looked at Damien. He was looking at her. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was different, the same quality, the same evenness, but without the professional layer that was always present when they were discussing the case. This was him without that layer, and she had not quite heard this version before, and was paying close attention. "Since the night I found you in the river," he said, and he said it plainly, without preamble, "I have not been able to think clearly about anything that does not begin with the knowledge that you are safe." He paused, but not the pause of uncertainty, the pause of someone who is taking care, with words that are important. "I don't say things I haven't been certain of for some time. I'm saying this because it's true, and because I think you should know it." She looked at him. The room was warm and quiet, and the fire was low, and he was looking at her with the same steady, non-performing directness he always had, except that the content of this particular look was something she had not encountered in the study before. "That frightens me," she said. "Honest and immediate." "I know," he said. "The last time I let someone into that kind of territory," she said, "my sister had been there before me. She had already made it impossible." "I know that," he said. "I know who you are dealing with and what she has done to your capacity to trust, and I'm not asking you to decide anything about any of it right now." "Then why are you saying it?" she said. "Because it's true," he said, "and because I don't know how to operate while holding things, I've decided to be honest about." She looked at him for a long time. Outside the study windows, the estate was completely dark, the grounds invisible, the trees gone into the night, just the faint reflected glow of the interior light against the glass. Inside, the fire was low, the papers were stacked. The documentation of everything that had been done to her was neatly organized and awaiting the right hands. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know," he said. "I may not be ready for a while, she said. I know that too, he said. And you're telling me anyway, she said. Yes, he said. Because I'm not someone who manages the truth for other people's comfort. A pause, the briefest possible one. That was part of the appeal, I think. You're not someone who does that either. She looked at the fire. She thought about what it would mean to let herself believe in this. She thought about the cost of being wrong again. She thought about the cost of not trying. She thought about a man who had jumped into a dark river for a stranger, and had waited in a hallway all night, and had told her the truth about difficult things in a study lit by firelight, without asking for anything in return. She did not answer, but she did not look away. Across town, Vivian was on her phone. She had managed the past week with her characteristic efficiency. The missing person report had been filed. The performance at the police station had been executed. Patrick had been managed, kept close, given the version of events that cast Clara as troubled and the family as worried, which Patrick had accepted because he had no particular reason not to, and because the story was consistent with what Vivian had been quietly building for years. Everything was in place. Everything was holding. And then her contact called. She listened. She did not speak during the call. She moved to the kitchen window and stood looking out at the city lights, while the voice on the other end told her what it had found. When the call ended, she remained at the window for a moment, and then she moved to a different part of her phone and navigated to a contact she used very rarely, the kind of number that was not stored under a name, but under a sequence of digits she had memorized long ago. She dialed. The voice that answered was not warm. I have a situation, Vivian said, at a property on the western edge of Ashwood, Cole House. There is someone there who I need dealt with before she has the opportunity to speak to anyone official. The voice on the other end asked 2 questions. Vivian answered both. I want this done in the next 48 hours, she said. She hung up. She looked at her phone for a moment. Then she set it face down on the counter and poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly. She looked at the clean lines of her kitchen, the art on the walls visible through the kitchen door, the ordered, beautiful arrangement of her life. She was not going to lose any of it. Not to Clara, not to anyone. The morning of the 10th day began quietly, which was, in retrospect, the first indication that it was not going to remain that way. Clara was in the kitchen at 7:30, making tea in the particular way she had settled into over the past week. The kettle on first, the cup warmed with a splash of hot water, then emptied, then the tea. It was her grandmother's routine, and she had carried it without realizing, the way you carry inherited things that were never formally given. She was standing at the kitchen window looking out at the garden wall when she heard Owen's footsteps in the corridor, and she heard, in the very specific compression of his stride, that the morning had changed. She turned around before he reached the kitchen. Owen appeared in the doorway. His face was entirely composed, which was how she knew it was serious. The more composed Owen was, the more precisely he was managing something that required management. He looked at her with the direct, economical attention of someone who had assessed the situation and was prepared to deliver it cleanly. There are people on the perimeter, he said. 4 of them, on foot, arriving through the East Woodland section. Curtis picked them up on the camera system 8 minutes ago. She set down the cup. From the eastern side, she said. That's the side away from the main road. Yes, Owen said. They came through the tree line. They're not lost, and they're not trespassing by accident. He held her gaze. We need you to move to the inner part of the house, the library or the study. The windows there face inward, over the courtyard. Where is Damien? She said. Already with Curtis, he said. The team is handling the perimeter. No one is getting to the house. She did not ask whether she should be frightened, because the answer was that the situation was one that warranted caution rather than panic, and she was capable of caution. She picked up the cup, took 1 sip of the tea she had not yet finished making, set it down again, and followed Owen to the study. The study faced the internal courtyard, as Owen had said, a small stone-paved space between the main house and the older outbuilding that had been the original kitchen. Through the window she could see the courtyard's centerpiece, an old stone plinth with a sundial on it that she had noticed on her first walk around the house, and beyond it the outbuilding's pale stone wall. This was a view that contained no external threat, which was, she supposed, the point. She sat in the chair at the desk and looked at the window and did not move. 30 minutes later, Damien came into the study. He moved through the door with the particular ease of someone who has resolved a situation and is not in any way troubled by it. This was one of the things she had noticed about him. The quality of his composure under pressure was not performance. It was the result of having been in enough difficult situations to understand that composure was the most useful thing you could bring to them. "Contained," he said. "All four. No one was harmed." She looked at him. "Who sent them?" He placed a photograph on the desk in front of her. It was an image of a printed document, slightly blurred at one corner, from the angle it had been photographed at, but entirely readable. She looked at it. It was a set of instructions, typed and printed, giving a location, a description, and a purpose. The name at the bottom of the page was not Vivian's name. It was an intermediary, a name she didn't recognize. But the description in the document was hers, Clara's, specific enough that someone who had never met her would be able to identify her from it. And the detail in the description was not the kind that comes from a general physical description. It was the kind that comes from someone who knows the person. "This came from Vivian," she said. "The intermediary is connected to her network," Damien said. "Curtis is already documenting the connection." He sat down across from her. "This is the document that closes the case. Combined with everything else, this instruction to prevent you from speaking to authorities is the final piece." She looked at the photograph. She looked at the description of herself, measured and specific, translated into the language of a directive. She let herself feel what it meant, and then she moved past it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was the last, dangerous thing. And the way to meet the last dangerous thing was to be entirely clear. "Make the call," she said. He was already looking at his phone. The call he made was to a number that was not stored in his regular contacts but in a separate section that Owen managed, the kind of careful organization that spoke to years of working in circumstances that required separation between different levels of access. She heard him on the far side of the study, his voice measured and specific, laying out the situation in precise, professional terms, the documentation, the network, the parties involved, the instruction document, the physical situation at the property that morning. The call lasted 9 minutes. When he came back to the desk, he sat down and looked at her. "They're prepared to move," he said. "Federal level, as I described. They have been briefed on the regional connection issues, and they will not be routing anything through the local structure. Warrants will be prepared." He paused. "They want your full statement, and they want it in person." She nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," he said, "if you're ready." She looked at the photograph on the desk. She looked at the description of herself written by people acting on her sister's instructions, the precise and deliberate language of people who had been asked to prevent her from speaking. "I've been ready for 10 days, she said. Owen drove her the following morning. She had not slept particularly well, not from fear, but from the particular alertness of a person who knows that something important is about to happen, and whose mind has not yet found the off switch for that awareness. She had lain in the east guest room listening to the house, and had thought, with the careful thoroughness she brought to all significant things, about exactly what she was going to say, and how she was going to say it. She had been here before, in a different way, standing at the edge of something that was going to change the shape of everything that followed. The conversation with her mother in the kitchen on Heron Lane, the meeting with Vivian in the apartment, the walk to Ridgewood Bridge. Each time she had walked toward the thing, rather than away from it, because she was not someone who managed difficulty by avoiding it. She was someone who moved toward it with her eyes open. Owen drove and did not fill the silence, which she appreciated. The morning was clear, an autumn morning, with good light and the particular crispness that comes after several days of rain. The town came into view through the passenger window, and she watched it as they entered it. The familiar streets, the buildings she had passed every week of her adult life, ordinary and continuous, and entirely unconcerned with what was happening inside any of the lives moving through them. The meeting was in a building she had not been to before, a federal office on the northern edge of town that she had driven past many times without paying it particular attention. She was met at the entrance by two people who introduced themselves briefly and led her to a room that was clean and functional and arranged for the purpose of receiving information rather than for anything social. She gave her statement for 2.5 hours. She was clear, thorough, and detailed. She answered questions without deflecting and corrected herself when she needed to, and flagged the places where she was giving her interpretation rather than direct fact, because that distinction mattered. She had always understood the difference between what she knew and what she believed, and she communicated that difference throughout the session. When it was done, the lead investigator thanked her, in the specific way of someone who has just received something useful, and is not in the business of saying more than that. "The warrants will be executed this afternoon," he said. "You'll be contacted about the formal proceedings once the initial arrest phase is complete." She nodded. "Is there anything you need from us before you leave?" She thought about it honestly. "Is there any reason I can't be present when my sister is informed of the charges?" she said. The investigator looked at her for a moment. "That is not standard," he said. "But in this case, given the nature of the charges and the documented attempts to silence the complainant, it is something we can consider." He paused. "You wouldn't be in the interview room, but you could be in the building." "That's enough," she said. She waited for 3 hours, in a room with chairs and a water dispenser, and a window that looked out at a car park. Owen sat beside her, and read something on his phone, and did not try to fill the time with talk. She found this deeply restful. She sat with her hands folded and looked at the window, and was simply present, which was something she had been practicing more consciously since the night on the bridge, the capacity to be in a moment, rather than always braced for the next one. She heard footsteps in the corridor outside at 2:15. Owen looked up. She looked at the door. A federal officer appeared and said, "Ms. Voss, we're ready, if you'd like to come through." The corridor was institutional, fluorescent lit, practical. But she walked through it without hurry. Owen stayed a step behind her. The officer stopped at a door with a glass panel and gestured, and through the panel she could see a room with a table, 2 chairs on one side, occupied by a man she took to be a lawyer, and 1 chair on the other side, currently empty. She was told to wait. She waited. A minute later, Vivian was escorted into the room. Vivian sat down across from the lawyer and arranged herself in the chair with the automatic composure of a person who was still, even now, managing how she looked. And then she looked up, and through the glass panel, across the 10 feet of institutional corridor, she met Clara's eyes. The composure held. Vivian was trained enough for the composure to hold even in this moment, but something left her face. Not color, not expression. Something deeper, something more essential. The particular certainty of someone who has built their life on a careful calculation and has encountered the specific moment in which the calculation was wrong. Clara looked at her sister through the glass. She thought about the kitchen on Heron Lane and the dish towel being folded. She thought about the apartment on Clifton Avenue and the cashmere top and the water glass held in both hands. She thought about the bridge and the rain and the deliberate, flat face of a woman who had decided that the most convenient thing that could happen to her sister was that she not be alive. She thought about a hallway in a house she had woken up in, and a man who had waited in that hallway all night for no reason, except that leaving did not feel right. The door opened, and she was shown into the room. She stood across the table from Vivian, and she spoke for 5 minutes without interruption, quietly and completely, the way you speak when every word has been chosen, not in anger but in clarity. "You decided what I deserved before I was old enough to decide for myself," she said. "You took my money, and you used my name, and you took away a relationship that mattered to me, and you built a story about my mind, designed to make sure that if I ever spoke, no one would believe me. And when none of that was enough, when the possibility of me speaking still existed, you walked to a bridge in the rain, and you used your hands on me. You decided that the cleanest solution to your problem was that I should not be alive to present one." She paused. She looked at her sister, who was looking back at her with an expression she had not seen before, not composure, and not calculation but something stripped of both. "I want you to know that I am standing here right now," she said. "I am speaking. I am entirely well. And the people in this building have everything you did documented and verified. I did not come here for an apology. I came here because you should see me. That is all." She stepped back from the table. Vivian's lawyer requested the session end. The session ended. She walked out of the room and down the corridor, and Owen was there, and she walked beside him to the exit, and outside, into the clean autumn afternoon. The formal arrest took place in the building behind her. She heard nothing of it. She was standing on the pavement, looking at the ordinary afternoon, at the people walking past with their groceries and their dogs, their entirely unconcerned ordinary afternoons. She breathed in. She breathed out. Her parents were contacted that afternoon. She did not see them that day. She was not ready for what that conversation would need to be, and she was not a person who began conversations she was not prepared for. That particular meeting would come, and she would approach it with the same clear preparation she had brought to everything else, but not today. Today, she asked Owen to take her back to Cole House, and she sat in the passenger seat and watched the town give way to the edge of town, and then to the open road, and then to the property wall, and the gate, and the drive, and when the car stopped, she got out and stood on the gravel and looked at the house for a long moment. She went inside. She made tea properly, from start to finish. She drank it in the kitchen. She was very quiet. The house was very quiet around her. Damien found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later. He looked at her face and did not ask anything. He made his own tea and sat across from her at the table, and they sat together, in the particular kind of quiet that is not empty but full, the way a room is full after something large has happened in it, even after the large thing is over. "Yes," he said. She drank her tea. She looked at the kitchen window, and the garden wall, and the autumn light. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "You did the hard part," he said. She did not argue with this. It was true, and they both knew it. Months passed, the way months do, when they are full of things that need doing, quickly in retrospect, slowly in the living of them. The trial began in February. The initial arrest phase in October had been followed by a period of legal preparation that Nora explained to Clara in detail, translating the procedural elements into plain language as she went, which was one of the many useful things about having a paralegal as a best friend. Clara had met twice more with the federal investigators, both times to review and confirm elements of her testimony, and both times she had arrived prepared, her notes in order, her recollections accurate and specific in the ways that mattered. Vivian's legal team had assembled quickly, and was, by general assessment, experienced and capable. This was expected. Vivian had always moved in circles where the resources for this kind of thing were available. Clara did not spend time thinking about it. The documentation was not the kind that could be dismantled by capable legal representation. It had been built precisely for situations in which capable legal representation would be applied against it. The other parties connected to the network were charged in separate proceedings. Gerald Marsh, the property developer, engaged his own legal team and attempted to minimize his role by placing a greater portion of responsibility on Oliver Sutton, who in turn attempted to do the same in reverse. The federal investigators handled the resulting conflict with the patience of people who had seen this particular dynamic before and had prepared for it. Carla Drew, the accountant, cooperated fully in exchange for considerations that were handled as a separate matter. The offshore connection was referred to the appropriate jurisdiction. Clara attended the trial on the days that directly involved her testimony. She sat in the witness box with her notes reviewed and her memory thoroughly organized, and she answered questions clearly and completely, and did not allow herself to be redirected by cross-examination toward interpretations that were not hers. She had been asked by her legal representative, a woman named Sylvia who Nora had recommended and whose directness Clara had immediately respected, to simply say what she knew, plainly and in the right order. She did this. On the days she was not required to testify, she worked. She had begun to build something while the legal process ran its course. It was quiet work, the kind she was used to, performed in the small amounts of time available between hearings and meetings and the continuing operations of the shop, which she had asked a temporary manager to handle, and which was running, not perfectly but acceptably, without her. She spent her evenings with notebooks and papers, planning a space she had begun to see clearly in her mind. A design studio, small and well lit, with room for the kind of work she had always done, and the kind she had always wanted to do. The studio space on the river had been available since she had looked at it 2 years ago. She had found it listed again, by accident, while looking for something else entirely, and she had called the agent that same afternoon with the particular decisive speed of someone who has been waiting long enough for something to stop waiting. The verdict came on a Tuesday in late April. The courtroom was quiet, in the way courtrooms go quiet when the thing everyone has been waiting for is about to happen. Clara sat in the gallery, with Nora on her left and her legal representative Sylvia on her right, and she looked at the front of the room, and she breathed steadily. Vivian was guilty on all counts. The sentence was read. The room held a particular kind of stillness. Clara sat with her hands in her lap, and heard every word, and did not look away. When it was over, she stood and collected her bag, and walked out of the courtroom into the corridor. which smelled of the particular institutional combination of cleaning product and old wood, and she stood there for a moment and let the ending of it arrive. Nora found her in the corridor. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How are you?" "Still here," Clara said. Nora looked at her. "That's the correct answer," she said. The inheritance was returned in full within the following weeks, the legal mechanism for this having been prepared in advance, once the verdict was no longer a question. The figure was, as it turned out, slightly larger than the original amount, because the firm had maintained the account carefully over the period since the estate was first settled, and interest had continued to accumulate. Clara sat with the paperwork at her kitchen table and looked at the number, and then she set the paperwork down and made tea and sat with her hands around the cup for a long time. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the back porch steps and the quiet, deliberate voice saying the things it had said. She thought about what Dorothy Voss had wanted for her when she had written that name into a legal document, not just the money, but the possibility. The option to do something different, the resource that turns a someday into an actual day. She paid off the apartment lease and cleared the debt and set aside what she would need for the next phase. Then she signed the studio lease, on a Friday morning in May, in an office that smelled of fresh paint and looked out over the street that led to the river. The studio was on the ground floor of a converted warehouse building 4 streets from the center of town. The space was rectangular and well lit, with tall windows on the south wall and a back door that opened to a small shared courtyard. The floors were old wood, cleaned up but not glossed over, the kind of floor that carried its history without apologizing for it. She had looked at several studios. She had come back to this one 3 times. She moved in over the course of a weekend, with Nora helping, and the kind of focused, companionable energy of 2 people who have been friends long enough to work in the same space without the need for constant conversation. She set up the workbench, she arranged the tools, she put her design prints on a board beside the window. She bought a small brass lamp at a Saturday market, for no reason except that it was good and it was hers. She called the studio Voss Design. Nora had said, in the careful way she used when she was about to offer an opinion that had more than one layer, "Is that the name you want, given everything?" "Yes," Clara said. "All right," Nora said. She had thought about it carefully. Voss was her name. It had always been her name. It had been her grandmother's name, and her grandmother had been a woman of principle who had worked and saved and planned and had left something real to the person she trusted would do something real with it. The name had been used by other people in ways she had not consented to and had not known about. That did not make it not hers. She was keeping what was hers. She had decided. Faye arrived on the first Monday of June. She was 22 and had graduated from a design course the previous spring and had brought her portfolio to the studio door with the slightly breathless confidence of someone who knows their work is good but is not yet certain that other people will agree. Clara had looked at the portfolio for 10 minutes without speaking, and then had told Faye what she thought was excellent about it, and what still needed development, both with equal directness, and Faye had nodded seriously, and said she agreed on both counts. She hired Faye at a salary she had calculated, based on what the work actually warranted, not what the market minimum would have accepted, because she knew the difference between being paid properly and being paid what you could be made to accept, and she was not going to run her business on the second principle. The first commission came in through the Chamber of Commerce. The second came through a referral. By the end of June, there were 6 active projects, and a waiting list she had not expected to develop this quickly, which told her she had been right about the demand and wrong about the timeline. She adjusted her plans accordingly. She was good at adjusting. Nora helped her structure the business, spending several evenings at the studio with her laptop and a notepad, setting up the accounts and the legal framework with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to her professional work. Clara paid her in dinner, and in the particular quality of friendship that is better than payment, the kind that has survived more than enough together to know it does not need accounting. It was 3 months after the trial, on a Wednesday morning in late July, when Damien came to the studio. She had not seen him since the evening she had asked Owen to drive her back to Cole House after the arrest, which felt longer ago than it was. They had been in contact, brief messages through the secure channel, the kind that confirmed the ongoing legal process was moving as it should, practical and informational. She had been keeping pace with her own life, and she admitted to herself, been keeping a certain careful distance as well, not from him specifically, from the size of the thing she felt when she thought about him, which was large enough that she had learned to approach it at an angle, rather than directly. She was working when she heard the knock. The door was open because the morning was warm, and she preferred the air when she could have it. She looked up. Damien was in the doorway. He was wearing a dark coat, and his hands were in his pockets, and his expression was the expression she knew. Direct, unperforming, entirely present. He looked different in this context. In her doorway, in her studio, in the space she had made. He looked like himself, without the framing of the estate, or the study, or the investigation around him. Just him, standing at the edge of the space she had built, looking at her. "You could have called," she said. "I know," he said. She set down what she was holding. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the same specific quality she had first noticed in the corridor outside the East guest room, and later in the library, and later again in the study by the fire. The look of someone who is entirely attending to one thing, and is not in any hurry about any of it. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the studio the way he looked at everything, thoroughly, and without comment, until the comment was worth making. He looked at the board of design prints, the organized shelves, the workbench, the brass lamp she had set on the desk. "You built this quickly," he said. "I had the design in my head for a while," she said. "I just needed the space." He stood in the center of the studio and looked at her. "I came to see how you were," he said. "I have been thinking about coming for some time. I wanted to make sure the timing was not presumptuous." "And is it?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "I thought I would come and find out." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the same directness he had always had, and she felt the same thing she had felt in the library on the evening he had told her the truth. The size of it, the particular undeniable weight of a feeling you have been keeping at the edge of your vision so you could keep working, and that was still there, unchanged, when you finally turned and looked at it directly. "There is something I need to say to you," he said. He did not move toward her. He stood where he was, at the exact distance he had always maintained, which was a respectful distance, the distance of someone who understood that space was a form of care. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "Perhaps," he said. "Tell me anyway." She looked at him. "You're going to tell me that since I left Cole House, the quiet there has had a different quality," she said. "That it is not the peaceful kind." Something moved in his face. "Yes," he said. "You're going to tell me that you're not asking for a decision," she said. "That you're telling me because you operate on honesty, and you find the alternative unsustainable." "Yes," he said. His voice was very quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything she had thought about over the months since October. The bridge, the river, the hallway, the study, the fire. She thought about a man who had told her the truth when it would have been easier to say nothing. She thought about the weight she had carried her whole life, the specific weight of being the one who managed and adjusted, and did not ask for more, and how that weight had gradually, carefully, over weeks at Cole House, become lighter. Not because anyone had taken anything from her, because she had been seen, and that was different. She thought about her grandmother on the back porch steps, and the things she had said, and whether they meant what Clara had always understood them to mean, or whether they meant something larger than that. Not just that the people who do the work without the noise are the ones who matter, but that they are also the ones who deserve to be known by someone who is paying attention. "You're going to have to be patient with me," she said. "I know," he said. She crossed the studio. Not quickly. At her own pace. The pace of someone who is moving toward something they have decided to move toward. She sat in the chair beside the window, the one she kept for clients, and she looked at him and she said, "Sit down." He sat down in the chair she pulled from the desk and placed beside hers, close enough that the arms of the chairs nearly touched, and they sat together in the light that came through the tall windows, and lay across the floor, and across the work table, and across the flowers she had arranged that morning for a commission. She looked at the river through the window. It was a different stretch than the one she had been in, calmer, bordered by walking paths, ordinary, and unhurried in its movement through the morning. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked away, and reached across the small distance between the chairs. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, not quickly, not tightly, just fully. The way you hold something that is exactly where it should be. Outside, The morning moved along its ordinary path. The river moved. People on the walking path passed the studio window with their dogs and their children and their daily purposes, entirely unconcerned with any of the particular things that were happening inside this particular room. The flowers on the work table caught the light. The brass lamp on the desk reflected it. Clara Voss sat in a studio she had built with money that had always been hers, and held the hand of a man who had found her when she was drowning, and had waited beside her until she was ready to find herself, and she felt, with the particular clarity of something known at last rather than only hoped for, the beginning of a life that was not managed or assigned or arranged by anyone else's decision. Her own. Entirely, completely, irreversibly her own.